All right. G'day, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Spark Your Fire. Happy Friday, John. Good to have you back as always.
Hi,
What's been
David.
happening?
Likewise, nice to see you and good to be chatting about all of our favorite topics today,
Oh,
property in
100%.
particular.
Property all the time, mate. Property and investing kind of in general, basically, right? So, hey, by the way, I think that episode that we did a couple of weeks back in relation to the four assets that you should own in 2026. I've got a couple of clients talking to me about that one. So yeah,
Really?
they're quite fascinated about that. Basically in terms of what they should be looking, Bitcoin, gold, shares slash ETF versus
Yeah.
property. So. No, it's thought provoking, which is good. And yeah, so I'm glad to report that we are getting a bit of positive response
Yes.
on that, John.
And there was another one we did, I think, the week after that, which was quite controversial with all the comments that we were getting about
Ah, yes, the 18-year cycle.
the 18-year cycle. Yes, we got a lot of good inquiry about that as well.
Oh, there you go, there you go. So good. Well, look, I'm certainly happy that our listeners are finding some of our contents helpful to a degree. So, which is good, which is what the whole reason why we want to keep on doing it, basically. So, the more feedback that we get, obviously, the more positive that we'll, and let us know at the same time if there's anything that you'd like us to chat about as well. We're always open to suggestions as well. Okay, so. But look, shall we talk about quickly give us a bit of a
Yep.
property update in terms of what we're seeing at the moment, John?
Yeah, yeah. So we always sort of start with general outlook, but also
Yeah.
like what level of inquiry we're getting. I think inquiry is always a
Yeah.
very good leading indicator. You're a
Yeah.
broker,
There you go.
I'm a
Hmm.
buyer, and so the inquiry is. I mean, it's still a slow start to the year. Like there's no doubt about that. It's slower than most years, but the last couple of weeks have certainly ticked up. I've got people who had come to me in the first couple of months of the year, prospects that went quiet and now they've come back and said, yeah, yeah, actually we're ready to go now. So that is very interesting. And new inquiries are coming in, which is good. I bought a property on the week for over the week at the weekend at auction for another client, and it's interesting because where we're at in the market is that the sellers' expectations and where the market is aren't really aligned. And so you've got like sellers still think they can get this, and they've got these fantastic properties, and they're quite emotionally attached to these properties, but the market has moved, and it's moved lower. And the only way, and so pre-auction offers, in my limited experience, uh, aren't necessarily working because the vendors need what they call education, the education process of seeing the level of demand at an auction. And so auctions are becoming a very, very good way to buy at the moment because if the vendor just doesn't accept what their property is worth, the only way you're going to get it is at an auction. And when a market's falling, I really welcome that. I've seen this a couple of times now over the last 10 or so years. I've been doing this, and in a falling market, auctions are great. Auctions are a great way to buy property. Anyway, we bought this property under the reserve, let's say. So it passed in. We were the highest bid. This is a property in Piedmont, near the fish markets in Sydney. Um, Sold under reserve, and the rest was negotiated after the auction.
Great
But a good,
result.
good, good result.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's good. And I think that brings us a very important thing because I think I can see at the moment a lot of the scheduled auctions have been pushed back, either postponed or didn't go ahead,
Correct.
right? And the auction clearance rate I think was down to like 55% last weekend as
Yep.
well. So it was a very low number. Usually when it's below 60, I think it's earned towards a buyer's market, basically, right? So.
Anything under 70% really is
Mm.
compelling. We've been there for 2, 3 months now. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So in other words, it's a great time to be buying in Sydney right
it
now.
is.
Say so.
It is. I was speaking to a buyer yesterday, and they was going through their questions, and one of the questions is now a good time to buy, which is obviously in some ways an unanswerable question, and in other ways a question that even if I have a view on it, it's irresponsible of me to say. But look, the one way to think about whether look, it is a good time to buy because prices are falling, and will they continue to fall? Well, probably, but it's hard to say.
Yeah,
But the main way to think about is now a good time to buy is actually not what the market's doing. It's your life circumstances. We've talked about this before, but
Yes.
don't worry about the market. The market is going to be around for the next 1,000 years, but you're only going to be earning an income for 30 years. And I think you have a life expectancy. The market doesn't have a life expectancy, and you have only, like, let's say 30 good working years to pay back the debt. So the market's going to do what the market's going to do. Don't worry about that. Is now a good time to buy? Depends entirely on your own circumstances and what you earn and how confident you are you're going to be able to keep earning that.
Yeah.
That's really the only thing you should be thinking about. So
So true. So true. Well said. That's right. Cool. Nah, thanks for the update, John. I think
yeah, how
that's
about you? What kind of inquiry are you getting? What are you seeing?
look, I think yeah, a mix of owner occupiers and investors at the moment, basically. So, the owner occupiers are still fairly strong at the moment. And the investors are also looking at somewhere try to get something that's more of a balanced cash flow type of thing. So, anything that's kind of around the 600, 700K mark is still very, very popular. Lots of demand. Owner occupiers, looking at potentially upgrading if they've got a bit of capital, or first home buyers try to get into the market with the 5% deposit as well. So, that lower end of the market, so certainly still pushing up ahead at the moment. So that's for
Yeah,
sure.
okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, but yeah, look, last couple of weeks have I think have started ramp up again. I have a suspicion that's because people have got a bit of a tinkling feeling about CGT and negative gearing is probably going to get touched, and who knows what's going to happen after the current budget being released around May. So, John, you and I talked about it off air. We'll probably cover it in a lot more detail once we have more understanding on what the proposed budget or the upcoming budget is and how that's going to impact property investors in terms of any changes to negative gearing and all that. So stay tuned. We will be deep diving more into that at probably next month as we get more information. But yeah, for the time being, I feel like in the next few months there will be a bit of a mad rush for investors try to get into and take advantage of it. In the, the I think the standard assumed case is that negative gearing and capital gains tax will probably get grandfathered, but you need to get the property before 1st of July or 30th of June, basically before that financial year, which means, yeah, you only get left about 2.5 months, a little bit to be able
Yeah.
to try to get in that little bit of window. So yeah, so I have a sneaky feeling that's what it's about. But
Yeah, look, I agree. I agree with you, and I think that the government has stopped all feedback on negative gearing and capital gains tax changes, which means they're going to do it, which is idiocy in my view. But we'll cover that another time. I'm not sure it's going to be grandfathered though, and the reason that I don't know that or don't believe that it will be is that there's no if you're in debt and you're trying to pay the debt back and you don't want to like cut all the services. Um, then grandfathering it means that there's no benefit through the higher taxes for like 10, 20 years. Like people have to buy it and then sell it. Whereas if you don't grandfather it, anyone who sells it from tomorrow is captured. So I don't know that they're sophisticated enough, these guys, to grandfather it. They just want the money. So I,
yeah,
I feel like it might not be grandfathered.
thank. Well, let's see. Let's see. Once it comes out, we'll certainly chat more around that, I guess. Hmm. Okay. All right, so that's good. Now we'll switch gears and jump into, I guess, our topics for today. Um, and look, this topic came about because, yeah, I have been working with a couple of clients under this kind of scenario. So the hypothetical scenario here today for our discussion is that I've got, let's say, someone as a first home buyer, currently living in Sydney, got a budget of about $800,000, wanting to be able to either one, purchase their first home in Sydney. And as Sydney siders, we know that if you purchase anything under $800,000, you'll be eligible for stamp duty exemption. So in other words, you'll be saving about 4% of your purchase price straight away. So that's about 30 grand also straight away, okay, as a first home buyer. But we also know as a Sydney sider that what can you buy in Sydney for $800,000? You're somewhat limited pretty much to units, maybe a small subset of townhouses, villas, if you're kind of more towards the western side of things. So that's one option. And then the other option is that, whether they should be parking that 800K by buying somewhere interstate, for example, right? Right. We know that at the moment, not a lot of states. I mean, you can still get something decent for $800,000, but you don't have a lot of options with interstate, with where you want to get a house and a block of land. So, certainly not in Brisbane, probably not in metropolitan areas anymore.
Mm,
You're gonna have to look further out. Melbourne, potentially, yes, because Melbourne at the moment is the most undervalued property market within Australia. Perth, that probably has ducked as well. Anything within the CBD, I know is pretty expensive at the moment. So yeah, so that's the kind of hypothetical scenario that we want to have a chat about today. If let's say, John, if I propose that question to you, if you're in that situation, so forget about John being the property investor. If I just say, John, you are a first home buyer today, you've got a budget of $800,000 and you are thinking about two options. You're thinking about whether you want to use that $800,000 to purchase your first home and taking advantage of that stamp duty exemption, or do you want to purchase an investment property interstate to be with somewhere with a block of land, so like a house sitting on a block of land? Is that going to give you better long-term growth prospect?
mm.
And is that going to give you better, is that the best money to be spent on opportunity cost?
Yes. Such a good question. If I'm not mistaken, David, this is a question that's not so hypothetical, that the sort of question that you do get fairly regularly. It's like 800,000, do I go into state or do I buy something to live in for a bit and get the advantages?
So,
So, I mean, if I break down what are the advantages of the first home buyer grant, it would be, let's say, about $35,000 of stamp duty.
yep.
Is that fair to
It's
say?
about 4%. It's about 4% of the
Yeah.
purchase price in New South
Okay.
Wales. So yeah, so let's
Okay.
say 800K will be 32 grand.
Okay.
So yeah, so still significant savings upfront.
That's significant. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to be flippant about the 32,000. So that's a big reason to buy locally.
Mm,
Um, in Sydney, you can buy a lot of units for 800,000, but for me, I almost always coax and encourage my buyers, my clients, if they're buying a unit, and particularly if they're an investor or it's going to become an investment at some stage in the future, to try to get a three-bedroom unit. Three-bedroom units are like a sweet spot, and even though units don't always perform all that well,
mm,
three-bedroom units do because they appeal to upsizers and downsizers. So, okay, so now we're at 800,000. We're looking for a three-bedroom unit now. That puts you squarely in parts of the Bankstown area. Bankstown probably with one bathroom, or Parramatta. You can get a bit more. You might even get two parking spots, but you get
mhm, mhm.
Parramatta area. You get two bathrooms, but let's err on the side of an older block. If you're happy to live there, and then what's the alternative? The alternative would be something a bit more substantial, but in, let's say, Melbourne. Melbourne's pretty compelling at the moment too, right? So,
Right.
all right. So let's say I'm looking for a townhouse in Melbourne. I don't know Melbourne all that well. Or let's say a three-bedroom unit in Western Sydney.
How about if we do this comparison? Because I know, in the western side of Melbourne, you can still get 800K houses. That's the free better.
Okay.
Yeah, free better under 800K. Like you probably don't know these areas, but like the likes of Hoppers Crossing, Werribee, they're within 20 kilometers to
Okay.
Melbourne CBD.
Okay.
Okay. Obviously not the top-notch type of suburbs, so the
Yeah, that's okay.
demographics, yeah, but you can still get it on a block of land. Okay, so three
Right.
bedroom, let's say three bedroom, two bathroom, two garage, like a standard home that's sitting on maybe a 400 square meter block, 300, 400 square meter block. Okay, that
Right.
versus what you're proposing, a three bedroom unit in Bankstown or Parramatta, what do you think is going to have better
What do you
prospect growth?
do? Um, uh, but this is an investor who lives, or a buyer who lives in Sydney, right? So there's that added utility of having like a place to go, a place to live. Like it's not
Yeah.
just an investment, what will grow more. Look, I think Sydney, if fast forward 10 years, Melbourne will outperform Sydney. I do believe Melbourne will outperform Sydney. I think Melbourne is just so generationally undervalued. I feel like it's like buying in Perth in like the year 2001 or something like that. I mean, it's 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 cheap. Melbourne is cheap, and I think that you probably only get this moment for another 30 years, right? I think it's generationally cheap. So I think Melbourne would be the better buy. Um, but red brick walk-ups, 70s walk-ups in Sydney are just are equally undervalued at the moment. They are so cheap. They're being sold at replacement value
Yes.
because it costs you $800,000 to build a unit these days. So you're buying these incredibly cheap properties, and I can tell you that like one of the reasons we have a housing shortage is because it doesn't make sense to build apartments west of, let's say, Parramatta because it's too expensive to build and you can't get that money back because the prices are too low. Um, so you're wanting an answer now, aren't you? Look, if I
I'm
live in
curious about your
Sydney
view.
and I get the $32,000 benefit, I
Yep.
would probably buy the Sydney apartment because
Okay.
it has dual purposes, which gives me a place to live. I get $32,000 discount.
Hmm.
That's real cash flow
Hmm.
that I get one time because I get it one time. Um, I would be buying this, and because you're buying into maybe not perfect undervaluation, but pretty compelling undervaluation, which is older apartments in Sydney.
Hmm.
I'd be
Yep.
buying the Sydney property, but I would be trying to follow it up in the next 2 years with a property purchase in Melbourne so that I still get into that leverage because I don't know if Melbourne's taking off immediately. I still think there's a period of languishing. So I would take the Sydney property because you get the first home buyer grant one time. Um, but I would be looking at Melbourne as quickly as possible thereafter.
You're greedy, man, John. You want both.
No, but look, I will. The choice is
I
the Sydney
understand.
apartment. But
I
Sydney apartment.
understand. No, no, no. I understand where you're coming from. Okay.
All right, your turn. What do you think?
Oh, look, I think I would tend to be pretty much on the same side as you on initial. And look, my thinking there is Melbourne's still got a bit of time to go. Like it's not gonna, like you said, it's not gonna go up in a short period of time. The main thing why Melbourne property prices hasn't really surged that much, at least in the short term, is because they have a really good supply pipeline. They know that
Mm,
the Victorian people certainly know how to build houses much better, much quicker than the rest of the country
is that right?
in comparison to us, yeah, because and they got land. Like Melbourne's got all four directions of available land, not like Sydney. Sydney is a lot landlocked, right? On the eastern side, we're locked by the sea. On the northern side, on the western side, we're locked by the mountains. So
Yeah,
there's limited land scope that we can use. So in comparison to that, that's one of the reasons why Melbourne prices at the moment is still relatively affordable. Because number one, they still have more supplies coming in. They do well in terms of building more houses, which means that has a dampened effect on the capital growth, at least in the short to medium term. Now, Melbourne took a bit of hit during COVID period, a lot bigger hit than the rest of the country. But now I think in the long run, it's going to recover ultimately, and there'll be more migrants. I think migrants are pouring in again in Melbourne again. So, if that equation starts to tilt again, so in other words, demand has suppressed supply, so demand's oversupply, then we will see Melbourne prices continue to go up. But I don't think it's going to be a surge. I think it's going to be a rapid growth over the next couple of years, just
yeah,
because they handle supply a lot better. Now, if we look at Sydney, like what you're saying, basically, the key thing here is you want to make sure that you get good quality assets here. $800,000, you can blow it on a green square unit, which a couple
yeah,
hundred other same units that's going to be around you. That type of asset is probably not going to be doing well in comparison to like the red type of
yeah,
brick unit that you're mentioning. The other thing I was thinking about as well is I like, townhouses in St. Mary's or even further out west, that type of thing, right? Like you don't have to be, if you look for around major transport hubs, but you can get a slightly better type of asset. So in other words, townhouses, villas, that type of things. And then three-bedroom units, I'll probably rank it that way. I probably want to get something that's, if we can get a townhouse, I want to get a townhouse because it's got a slightly bigger land component. Same with villa. And then afterwards, a three-bedroom unit,
yeah.
basically like what you're proposing there.
Mm,
So that type of strategy is going to work out quite well. And looking at where the house prices in Sydney sits, that gap between house prices, townhouses, and units are just too big to ignore, basically.
in
So
Sydney, yeah,
in
yeah,
Sydney, in Sydney,
yeah,
correct. So in terms of affordability, the next or people right now, most people on an average income in Sydney, they can only afford units. So what does that mean? Units probably going
Mm,
to continue to get pushed up in the next couple of years, right? Because that's what people can only afford, especially in a high rate environment, unless people keep on upgrading. But that's a different story. So that's the reason why I think, if I've got 30,000, sorry, if I've got that 800K budget today and it's the first home buy, yeah, sure, I'll take advantage of that and purchase something in Sydney, get a good quality asset. I'll probably live in there 6 to 12 months, basically. If I like it, I will keep living in there. If I don't like it, I'll rent it out. I'll turn it into an investment property, which means you'll get a bit of borrowing capacity back. And looking at doing a bit of debt recycling, pay down the loan a little bit, try to see whether you can get some equity up potentially, and then looking at Melbourne houses,
yeah,
just like you are. So funny enough,
very
our
similar.
thinking were very, very similar to that
Yeah,
extent. I don't think you will lose even with a three better red brick units in Sydney. Like
agree.
it's not going to go back like what you're saying. Replacement cost is way more expensive nowadays, and they're going to build the same thing for that same cost. So
No, no, no. Look, and it's hard. It's hard. I mean, it's hard to go past Melbourne right now. And even though
100%.
like the nuance of the question sort of leads you towards the Sydney option, I think led me towards the Sydney option at least. But Melbourne is just so compelling right now. That said, my lovely wife was in Melbourne a couple of weeks ago, let's say a month ago for work, and
Mm.
she's like, it's a little bit dystopian down there. Like there's a lot of
Oh, really?
crime.
Okay. Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
Melbourne's always been a bit cooler than Sydney, a little bit hipper than Sydney, but like it's not in good shape. But I haven't been. I haven't been. The last time it was 2019 to see the Australian Open, so I haven't been there in a
There you go.
little
It's been
while.
a while. Been a
Yeah,
while.
yeah.
And if we
What?
add the other equation, John, sorry, just to wrap it up
Mm,
as well, the other part of the equation which can probably lead people to thinking about how to decide is if you just purely look at it from an investment perspective, from a rental yield perspective. Okay. So let's just say hypothetically you purchase a unit in Sydney and then 12 months down the track, you moved out. You decide to move out, you turn into an investment property. If both of the budgets are $800,000, and if we're talking about like a house in Melbourne within 20 kilometers, like the type of areas I'm talking about, Werribee, Points Cook, you're probably not going to get the same yield as what you get in Sydney.
right,
So it's going to be easier to hold in Sydney as opposed to a house in Melbourne in that
right.
case, right? So from that rental yield perspective, that also adds that extra bit of comfortability, especially for, we're seeing interest rates going to be probably higher for longer at this stage. So cash flow is going to be important for people to be able to hold on to their property. So that might
Hmm.
be another factor to consider too.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean those three-bedroom units in red brick walk-ups are very rentable. They're very easy to rent. Okay, yeah, very interesting. There is one thing that's always on the tip of my tongue when we talk about sort of the kind of the momentum of the market, because the market will go down, it'll go up, and it'll do
Yes.
what it's always done. So don't be worried. It's not different this time. But one thing that's also interesting that amazes me every time I see it, and it'll be interesting to see if it happens this time. The St George area in Sydney, which is an area I'm a big fan of,
Oh,
that's sort of Cogra,
hmm.
Carlton, Allawah. There's some Sans Souci. There's some other suburb. The
Rockdale.
St George area in Sydney just seems to do the opposite of the rest of Sydney. So, and I don't know why, but it dances to the beat of its own drum. So, if the rest of Sydney is in this big correction, you might find that the St George area does this um, counter-cyclical a pop in prices for whatever reason. I have a theory on it, but watch the St George area because I mean you'd only get a two-bedroom unit in the St George area for 800,000, but that and I'm not even recommending it, but just watch St George. It always goes in the opposite direction. So it might be the one part of Sydney that goes up while everything else is going down. It's an odd thing. My theory as to why that happens is because the St George area is a bit of a hospital corridor. It's a bit of a like a healthcare corridor. St George to Bankstown actually, and I think there's a lot of safe nursing, medical carer type jobs, I think like highly rentable, blah, blah, blah. And I think it's tied into that hospital corridor that makes that area compelling, particularly during recessions.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Well, there you go. There's a bit of tip for our listeners in terms of that. But you can only get two better for in St. George area
Yeah,
though for that budget, right? So that's probably something that you have to sacrifice,
true, true.
unfortunately, as opposed
Yeah,
to maybe getting a free better in Bankstown or around Bankstown,
that's right.
potentially where the metro is coming too. So
Correct, correct. Yeah, I mean, St George doesn't have the same compelling drivers. Like, there's no
no.
obvious sort of narrative in St George, but it just tends to be like a counter-cyclical, contrarian suburb or area. So one to watch.
Yeah, right. Okay. Interesting. All right. Well, good to know. Thanks, John. I think that was good. And funny enough, we obviously didn't talk about what our preferences are, but we actually end up being very similar in terms of the
Correct,
thinking, the line of thinking there. So,
correct.
but look, this is just opinion. This is just our opinion, basically. Certainly not advice. So anyone that's kind of looking to do this, you obviously need to consider your specific circumstances, and have a chat with professionals to work out what's going to be best for you. Anything else to add, John?
Nothing to add. Looking forward to
Cool.
talking about capital gains tax and negative gearing next time. We can. Who's
That's the
ever
one
said
that
that
puts you
before?
on fire, mate. That's the one. So everyone else get ready. John's gonna have a big blast on that one once we know more details on it. So my ears are already burning at the moment just hearing it. So anyway, until next time, guys, brace for yourself. I reckon there's a very likelihood that there's going to be another rate increase on the 5th of May. So the May cash rate may be going up again at this stage because inflation is certainly not on control. When you're doing your cash flow projections analysis, make sure you factor in the extras that's going to come. It's better to be defensive in 2026 as opposed to offensive in terms of your investing strategy. That's my personal opinion, and we can probably cover that on a different topic on a different podcast as well. But yeah, play it safe, be conservative, look after yourself, and we'll chat to you guys again in another episode of Spark Your Fire. Cheers, John and David.